everyone. Thanks so much for making time and joining our webinar today. We are going to be talking all about record authenticity and exploring details of metadata in SharePoint and Purview and how all of that helps. And with me today, we will do some intros. We have our expert in all of this, Jessica, who will be leading us through our presentation.
As she's mentioned, my name is Jessica Dobson. I am a digital transformation analyst here at Gravity Union with a specialty in records management. So I've been working in the RIM space through both public and private organizations for the last few years. I specialize in designing governance solutions for digital records with Microsoft SharePoint, taking into consideration both regulatory and business requirements. I've also been a member of the ARMA International Association, as well as the Association of Canadian Archivists for a couple years. Our agenda for today, why we're all here, is first going over some key terms. I'll then feed those into what particular issues and new technology developments are currently happening in the records management landscape. Then we'll go into a bit of a deep dive on some of the key Canadian legislations and what the requirements are for metadata, and then translating those into system requirements that you would be looking to use to manage your electronic records, with some key examples from SharePoint and Purview, as they are fairly inescapable these days. Most systems that are Microsoft-based are using SharePoint and or Purview. And then finally, I'll wrap that up with some key takeaways. So covering all the information and the tips and tricks that I have covered, wrapping that up into one neat bow. As Jas mentioned, there will be a Q&A period at the end. That doesn't mean that you have to save your question for the end. She will be monitoring that Q&A box. So whenever a thought occurs to you as I'm going through this, please just type it in there and submit, and then we will address it at the end. All right. So beginning with our key terms, I acknowledge that most of us have been working in the records management sphere for quite some time. So we're all probably very familiar with these. The reason why I have put it at the start of our presentation today is just to have that common ground so that we are talking about things in the precise way that the standards that we will be referencing later on describe them. This may or may not translate directly to the policies that you already have in place. I'm sure the underlying meaning is consistent throughout, but this is just the particular wording that we find in the standards. So this is taken from the Electronic Records as Documentary Evidence Standard, which applies across Canada. First, it describes metadata as attributes that identify a record and describe its use, management, custodial history, and technological changes. So we are used to referring to metadata as any kind of adjectives, essentially, that describe a record, but this in particular describes it as management, custodial history, and technological changes, as well as its day-to-day use. So those are the key categories that we'll be looking at later on. And then what is a record? So here we have any document made or received by an organization in the course and by reason of its activity and kept for further action or reference. So this is relating records directly to an organization's mandate and their business processes. So it isn't just any odd bit of information, but it is generated by the fulfillment of the organization's reason of activity and kept for further action or reference. So anything that the staff will need to refer back to for future decisions, or just to see the history of that particular project or how that action came about. Finally, we have evidence. So here it means all means by which any alleged matter of fact, the truth of which is submitted to investigation, is established or disproved in a legal proceeding. So here we are making that distinction that records and metadata come together to prove an alleged matter of fact and submit to an investigation. And how that is submitted to the courts is through its admissibility requirements. So this describes the capability of recorded information to be introduced as evidence in a legal proceeding. So not only are we looking to maintain records and their resulting metadata, through the system requirements for that organization and tying it to their business process. But we also want to make sure, particularly for any public-facing government organizations, that these records are capable of being submitted to courts. So you are able to prove the custodial history and who used and managed that particular record as it relates to its particular business context, and use that all together as proof in a legal proceeding. This is the second half of that. So we will also be covering some privacy standards, particularly PIPEDA. So again, this is another cross-Canada legislation, and it is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. I'll get into that a little bit more later on in the session, but the two definitions that I've pulled out from PIPEDA are data. So this is a means representation of information or concepts in any form. So this is quite broad. We're not just talking about metadata here, but any data that represents any information or concepts in any form. So it is quite broad. And in particular, when we relate that to personally identifiable information, the data around that can have several different forms. I thought it was also particularly relevant to highlight electronic document, the definition there. So this means any data that is recorded or stored in any medium in or by a computer system or other similar device, and that can be read or perceived by a person or a computer system or other similar device. It includes a display, printout, or other output of that data. So this is significant that we are considering any kind of system generated information that was originally created by or in a computer system, regardless of whether it was printed out or taken a different shape afterwards. So if it was saved on a hard drive or something like that, it is still considered an electronic document. All right, with those definitions in mind, I will also draw on some key evolutions in technology as the landscape quickly changes. So we're now entering in the age of AI. So artificial intelligence can be used to search and retrieve information in response to queries. This has a direct impact on how we structure and use our data and our electronic documents in a system. So here we are looking at using metadata to help classify and manage data. Unclassified data leads to more risk of being uncovered by AI accidentally as it combs through any and all records available to it. There's also the distinction here that because metadata is helping to classify and retrieve that information in search queries, we don't want to include any sensitive information that we want discoverable by any kind of broad party that would be using the AI tool. So we want to really cleverly consider exactly what metadata requirements are put upon us by the standards across the government, as well as our responsibility to protect that information with the Privacy Acts. All right, now that we've wrapped that up, we will go a little bit deeper into electronic records as documentary evidence standard. So again, this is a Canada-wide legislation, and I'll give you a brief overview of the context around it. So the latest version was just published by the Canadian General Standards Board in June 2024. It was originally written in 2017. So overall, it is quite a recent piece of legislation. It is available for open reference online from publications.gc.ca. So again, you can access it at any point for free in its most updated PDF format. It was written with participation from records managers at Canadian institutions, including regulators. So we had participation from Library and Archives Canada, from the UBC, as well as University of Toronto information management programs. And there were a lot of key participation and guidance there. So it is written with that understanding of the context that all records managers are facing right now. And it is information technology system agnostic. So even though I will be translating those to SharePoint later on, it doesn't have to respond directly to the SharePoint system. It could be any ADRMS system that you're choosing to use. It does support the Evidence Act. So because it is drawing on that requirement for electronic records to be submissible in court, it is supporting that Evidence Act. The scope of the standard applies to both public and private sector activities, so universally across the board. This, I just drew a direct quote of the scope found on page 3. The National Standard of Canada provides guidance for developing policies, procedures, processes, and documentation that support the continuing reliability, accuracy, and authenticity of electronic records to do 3 main principles. So the first of those being to ensure that electronic records can reliably support business decisions and exchanges of commitments. So again, this is drawing on that very clear connection of a record to its business function and its business process that the staff and end users are originally creating and managing that record. It is also to support the admissibility and weight of electronic records in legal proceedings. So making sure that they are verifiable and defensible. Third, it is to protect the capability of electronic records to effectively document an organization's decisions, actions, and transactions, and to hold accountable those who are responsible for them. So again, we do have a responsibility as records managers to fulfill this for the public on behalf of our organization. And then just a note on the particular wording of this standard. So I will be pulling out the full quotes here, and with the acknowledgement that anything that is highlighted as shall is a firm requirement for the standard. So this is to support the writing of policies, any conversations that you are having with those executives and you're trying to hypothetically argue for more support for your electronic document records management system or using SharePoint or Purview or anything like that. Anything that I have signified as shall here, pulled from a direct quote from the standard, is something that you can really base that conversation on. Anything that is prefaced by should is more of a softer recommendation. So this is something that would guarantee the success and the use of the system, but it is not as firm of a legal requirement. All right, so what is the absolute critical metadata that a system should be capturing? So metadata shall be captured or created that uniquely identifies a record and establishes its integrity at the time of creation and throughout its record's life cycle. So the first line here is that exact requirement. It is quite broad, so they specify that critical metadata should include, but is not limited to, elements like a document title, dates of creation and or modification, author, recipient, and document type. It then goes on to describe that metadata shall continue to accrue or be created that tracks technological changes such as migration or conversion if it's going to a different file format, its integrity, and its rights. So things like permission and access. So all of these are connecting the document back to its original context and its business function at its time of creation, as well as tracking throughout its life cycle who is editing, who is correcting that, if there are any actions that are moving that document to a different location with different access requirements, or converting that to a preservation format, or simply updating it to a newer version of Word, for example. That all needs to be captured as metadata associated directly to the file itself. For any metadata that is wrapping to its context and business functions, this is a softer recommendation. So all records should be classified in order to fix them to their documentary context and indexed in order to facilitate their retrieval. With electronic records, these functions are implemented through metadata. So this is something that we are all very familiar with. So we do have a responsibility to be classifying our records according to retention schedules, to fully translate the document from their original business function to their life cycle. So while that is happening through some of the metadata that's captured in the system, like its file path and that, we should be fully indexing that in order to facilitate the retrieval. In some systems, this does mean a little bit more of a manual classification. In others, we can use automated classification and scripts to help that. But this is making sure that each document is associated and organized to its business context. This is another key success point for making sure that your organization is mature enough and ready enough to fully roll out AI tools, is ensuring that the documents are all fully classified according to their documentary context and the associated permissions around that. Sorry. Lost the screen sharing there.
Yes, we see your desktop background there.
Enjoy the whale. There we go. That fingered my way back in. Okay, defensible disposition. So the final stage of the document's life cycle and another key indicator of admissibility to court is whether or not you can defensively describe that the document has been deleted and why, or if it has been retained fully, why it has been retained. So all that is quoted here. So the organization shall be capable of submitting documentation of the disposition of its records when proof is warranted or required based on business, legal, and audit requirements. This documentation should identify the records disposed of using associated metadata. So here they highlight that the classification code, if applied, inclusive dates, office of primary responsibility, or the organization who authorized the disposition and the time of disposition. So all of this is possible metadata fields. These are recommended as those key indicators that you can use to defensively dispose of a document and keep that recording. They also highlight that this record of disposition and the actions there shall be kept as proof by the organization for as long as the organization exists. So this is a permanent record that you will have to maintain throughout your organization's lifetime. Whether or not it has all of these key pieces of metadata is something that will depend on how you roll out the classification structure and how you translate that specifically to the documents themselves. But these are those examples that you can use to kind of keep in mind as you're having that conversation with the broader parties in your organization. So some tips and guidelines for that. We do recommend, where possible, to standardize your metadata use across the system and the organization. So you should be using as consistent an approach to all business functions as you can, with some specialization to help end users use their files and find everything. So some standardization is more of that administrative focused metadata. So tying it to their business context, using a content type or document type associated directly to each file and their particular business library. You can also use metadata to close files when finished. So this can be tracked in a status column or a simple yes, no check mark and populated down across multiple bunches of files. So typically we see this in a project or a contract structure where we have different file folders for particular contracts or particular projects. That are complete and then wrapped up in a closed check mark. This is a standard approach that you can use regardless of what particular, if it's a legal department project and contracts, or if they are an IT project. You can use consistent metadata across the board there. This ensures that you, as an administrator, as well as the IT team potentially supporting you, you will have the same consistent triggers for your classification and your approach to the rollout there in whatever technological system you use. So that unique metadata that supports the end user use of files can be layered on top of that. And these are things that they have direct control over. So they can use a custom date field to filter the most recent or active files to the top. So moving away from just using like the last modified, which can mean a wide variety of things, having a actual manual date column will allow them to set that date themselves if it's a contract signed on this date field or an expiry date or something like that. They can also take coworkers in columns if they want to track a particular review process. So when we're moving a document from a draft to a final stage, typically there's that sign off. So you can have a column tracking that status. Some examples of how that would look in SharePoint itself is something like this. So I've mocked up a document library here for the bananas project. Anybody that has had the pleasure to work on a project knows they're often bananas. So that was my theme there. This particular library is focused on contracts and agreements. So that is the library title. You'll notice that this is a very particular business function of this particular project. So we are already separating out in this particular library those documents. We are not grouping them together with all of the documents related to this project. This means that we can have that custom metadata associated directly to all of the documents in this library because they are all that similar document type. So here I have three main folders. The icon will look a little bit different from the yellow file folder that you're used to seeing. This is because we're using a document set here. So for SharePoint, a traditional yellow file folder does not have a real physical representation in the system. So while you can label or put something on that folder in metadata, it's not really tied to an entity. Similarly, you can't really use scripts to manipulate a bunch of documents associated in a folder quite as well. So we use document sets instead, which is a actual entity recognized in the SharePoint system. So it is a little bit more of like a physical thing instead of just like a loose concept of an envelope for the files. So document sets do allow you to associate metadata directly to them, and then they can apply that metadata universally to all of the documents inside of that document set. So this, as an administrator, is going to save you a lot of time, especially when you are managing that close date and any kind of associated triggers around that. You would just set it at that higher document set level and it would apply down inside. So here you can see the Banana Boat construction project folder document set is complete. It was originally done in 2016-2017, and it is a statement of work. The other two are not closed off yet, so they have not been checkmarked, but they're slightly more recent. So this is that this library is specific to the function and the document type. Here is our custom metadata to track that lifecycle. And finally, using document sets to apply metadata to the related fields. All right, moving on to our privacy legislation. First, we'll focus on PIPEDA. This is a private sector focused legislation that does have some exclusions. So it covers all of Canada, excluding BC, Alberta, and Quebec, because we have our own very similar provincial legislation that is covering what PIPEDA would cover. So all of the private sector organizations in these provinces have their own. But the overall scope of PIPEDA is to govern the processing and security of personally identifiable information in relation to key business processes. So its aim is to help organizations know what data is collected, used, and potentially disclosed to other parties for all procedures your organization undertakes. So this ensures that we are data stewards, we are maintaining that information securely, and a way that we can do that is by using metadata and that classification. So not only do we have that electronic document standard that is more traditionally focused on that admissibility in court, we also want to make sure that we are maintaining the integrity of our information and the protection of the sensitive and private data inside. So the second part of PIPEDA is particularly focused on electronic documents. That's where I pulled the definitions from earlier. So here I'm highlighting for the retention of documents, section 37C, is if the electronic document was sent or received, any information that identifies the origin and destination of the electronic document and the date and time at which it was sent or received is also retained. So this is particularly relevant to documents with an electronic signature marking an approval or documents recording consent of personal information collection. But essentially anything that you are using to record an approval or a signature there, this is outlined that you should maintain that as metadata associated directly to the file because it is information that identifies the document's authenticity, how it was sent and received, who signed it, what the origin and destination of that file was, and the date and time at which it was sent and also received. Outside of PIPEDA, for the public sector, we do have a variety of different provincial and territory level privacy and information laws. So you're used to hearing FIPA or FOIPA or ATIP or RIPA. It's a bit of alphabet soup out there with all the different acronyms we've come up with. But these are particularly focused on, similar to PIPEDA, the protection of privacy as well as the freedom of information, so that, requirement that as a public body, you are responsible for maintaining documentation around certain actions, certain business functions, and sharing that to the public in FOI requests. So if you are curious about what privacy legislation implies, particularly for broader companies that have a bunch of different jurisdictions that they're operating out of, you can check out the Privacy Commissioner's website to find some guide sheets and an overview of the different regulations. So just a quick shout out there. Here's a QR code if you want to find that privacy regulation tool. It'll just give you a quick process of what kind of information are you collecting, what jurisdiction are you operating under, what is the focus of your organization, and then it will tell you exactly what legislation applies. I have taken the liberty of doing in all my research here, trying to keep this all straight. So I've made a little infographic to just kind of highlight what the act is called and what province it relates to. Just a disclaimer, this is not official legal advice. Please do not quote me on this. This is just for my own sanity. So highlighted in purple are those exceptions to PIPEDA. These are the private sector provincial specific laws. BC has PIPA, Alberta has PIPA, but they've also separated out their public sector to have a separate Privacy and Access to Information Act. So those have just been passed as of May 2025 and are now in effect. Saskatchewan and Ontario have two public sector standards as well. So there is a provincial level government standard, as well as Ontario has municipal FIPA and Saskatchewan has local authority FIPA. So these are for those smaller governments specifically. And then Quebec has a bit of a unique landscape as well. So they have an Access to Information Act and a Public Sector Privacy Act. The titles for those are quite long, so I don't have a fancy acronym. But for the private sector, it is covered by their new Law 25. So that was passed in 2020. And this is very similar in function to the European GDPR. So that has a very robust framework, as well as potential monetary fines for not following the protection of personal information for organizations. Highlighted there. So those are just some key differences that I wanted to touch on, but overall, the kind of underlying scope of these is all very similar, is that protection of information as well as managing it in a way that the system respects the data that you've collected and is tracking it according to what authority you're using to manage that information, and releasing it when it is requested. So for business contexts that involve the collection, use, and disclosure of PII, you should be flagging this, I imagine you are already, in the retention schedule and document classification. So as you're looking to use an electronic records management system, it is important to just highlight this in whatever kind of labeling classification system you design. As well, for personal information banks, these are required under most of the acts that I just highlighted. When classification is marked as involving PII, searching on the classification or the content type can be done to perform controlled restricted searches to satisfy requests to update or delete personal information. So personal information banks are essentially an index of information management systems record of where each personal information source is managed, what documents do have PII, and their associated classification. So what I'm proposing here is that because we are marking that in the classification structure, we can use those to perform controlled searches on the classifications or the content types directly for an individual name if they want that to be updated, or if they're requesting access to all of the documents that are including their personal information. As well, another key consideration is whenever possible, avoid making any personal information discoverable in metadata. So this gets back to our original point with AI, is that metadata is fundamentally a search term for any electronic information system. So any kind of personal identifiable information that is in a tag associated with a document, even if that document is held in a very secure place that not many people have direct access to, that metadata is still in the background in that system, and it's recorded by the search index. So if you have a wide rollout of an AI, this is a way that those documents are potentially more discoverable, and you can overshare that information without that intention. So some examples to steer clear of is not putting employee numbers or SIN numbers as a metadata field, as well as personal addresses. Again, I'm sure this is common knowledge, but just putting this all together in the framework. So with a particular example from Purview, here we have a retention label file plan descriptor. So when you initially create that label, you can give it a reference ID. So this I have translated directly from BC ARC's classification, our administrative record schedule. So here is that primary and secondary code, and then the particular record classification is grievances. But we do have several other fields at our disposal. So essentially metadata around this particular retention label. So I've highlighted that the business function and department is human resources, the category is labor relations. You can use a subcategory if you need to, especially if it is a very particular primary or secondary. But at the bottom here, we should be using the legislation areas to mark what labels involve PII. So here the authority type is regulatory, and the provision is the BC PIPEDA. So this allows us to highlight for any other administrators in the system that all documents under this classification do have that potential PII. All right, so how we can apply all of what I've talked about to SharePoint and Purview, give you a little bit more of that like end-to-end context for this. I'll also be going over disposition process here, as most of the metadata that we've highlighted today do come up in disposition. So in any guaranteed system generated fields for the SharePoint site, you will have the file name, the date deleted, deleted by, created by, and original location with a partial file path recorded in the SharePoint site recycle bin. So these are all going to contain information because they are system generated. They don't require the end user to particularly act in a certain way or manage their files in a particular way. All of this information is going to be automatically captured. That does mean that you have to be very clear with how end users create and upload their information in a timely manner to the system, because that is what you're using as those dates recorded here. And as well, you won't see any of the custom metadata fields either on the administration side or for that end user business process reflected in the site recycle bin when the files are deleted. So this is just a call out that it is particularly important to have the original location be very context specific, because that is the primary indicator here that you will have for the document's original context. If you have a very general SharePoint site with a bunch of documents all managed together in one library, they will all have the same original location, so you won't really be able to differentiate what case or project they were originally managed by. And thus, of course, that's captured in the document name itself. As well, it's important to recognize that when a document is deleted, it is held in this site recycle bin for an additional 30 days after it has been deleted, and then it will move on to the second stage recycle bin for another 60 days or so to bring that total up to 93 days of additional retention. If you have very specific retention requirements for your organization, it's important to keep this extra 3-month window in mind when you're designing your retention schedule. Files can be manually deleted a second time here in the recycle bin, or restored back to their original location. For the second stage recycle bin, only the site admins have access to this and can perform actions on the records in there. So again, it's very important to have a very clear access structure for every single SharePoint site that manages official records, which is, in case you haven't already been listening, pretty much everything. So have very clear training for those individuals that are site administrators, and that clear communication with the IT team is quite important there. So here is an example of what a second stage recycle bin looks like. Here, the site name is cafeteria. On the left, you'll see the site navigation. So the recycle bin, the first stage is always located at the bottom of this navigation here. The second stage recycle bin can be reached. There's a hyperlink at the end of the first stage recycle bin that is only visible for site administrators. So you can click on that and then find this guy. It has the same metadata fields, the name, date deleted, deleted by, created by, and original location as the first recycle bin. It's just that additional layer, it's a longer safety net for that file to be retained. When you're using Purview and retention labels to have a review process before a disposition action, here are the main metadata fields that you will get in that process. So you will still see the file path recording its location originally in the SharePoint Online library. You'll get the title of the file, the name of the retention label applied to the file, any comments that are recorded by the disposition approver in that process, who it was deleted by, which is just the Active Directory count of the disposition approver, and the deleted date. So this is a system generated date that is supposed to record when it was deleted. As you might already be wondering, there are several deleted dates we've already talked about. When the document was deleted from its SharePoint library, when it entered the first recycle bin, and when it entered the third one. When we're talking about a review process, there's also a couple other dates here. All of this export can be managed in an Excel spreadsheet. So automatically, Purview is set up to not retain this information permanently. So a regular export schedule should be done to capture all the files and all of their disposition information. So here's my example of that disposition review. So I have my test 5 days classify label. Here, I wasn't following my naming convention, so I don't imagine test 5 days classify has much meaning for a particular record schedule, but because this name is captured in the disposition export here, it is important to name that in a way that reflects the document's business function. So here we have name, location, author, applied by, applied date, expiry date, and stage name. When you have documents selected, you will see the actions that the reviewer can take. So here is primarily how they would approve that document for deletion. They can also relabel it, extend it, or add additional reviewers. So if they don't feel that they have the authority to perform that action, they can pass that on to somebody else. There is, of course, some ramifications to that. The additional reviewer would need to have the same access to Purview and the files here that the first reviewer would have. So that's something to keep in mind. They can also refresh. This will just refresh the page, and then the export button is where they would export the full disposition, the pending disposition file export there to Excel, and it would cover all of these metadata columns. Again, this does not include any of the custom columns that we're using to manage the documents throughout their life cycle in their original library. These are all system generated. You cannot add in any additional columns or remove them here. So one way that you could tie the two, all of the metadata that you're capturing for a file together is to create this export and then manually transition over the metadata from the original repository. If you move over to the disposed item tab from the pending disposition, so these are all ones that have been previously approved for disposition by a reviewer, you get a slightly different view of the metadata. So here we have that comment column. So this is where the approvers can justify or provide any extra context around their decision here. So the example is I've put in these records are obsolete. You can record pretty much any information that you want in this comment box. So if they are tied to a specific project or contract, for example, an event trigger expiring, then it is recommended that you include that information in the comment box here, just so you have that record that they were originally associated with that particular project or file folder, and they are now on a group level disposed of. You also see the progress. So here they flag that it will take up to 15 days to be deleted after approval. So again, the system is building in a bit of extra time for the documents to officially go through that deletion process. SharePoint's got some mysterious timer jobs running in the background. They never really tell us what schedule they're functioning on, so you have to factor that in. For any retention that is like, 10 years, this probably isn't a big deal. For that more transient retention, where you're only really managing a file for 6 months or up to a year, this could add a bit of additional time and intentionally. This is the export button at the top. So you cannot perform any additional actions on the files at this time. So you don't have to have anything selected. You just see right underneath the disposed item, the export button. And then this is a screenshot of what that Excel file will look like. So for the most part, it looks very similar. We have the full file path, the title of the file, the tag name, the comment box, the account of the official deletion approver, and then the deleted date. If anybody was very eagle-eyed and looking at our original, I'll go back, view of the information here, you'll see that we don't have a deleted date column. We have a review started on column with a certain amount of dates. At the first, we have March 11th, 2025, and then we have some June 14th, 2025. If I go back to this export, which is an exact export of this particular library, you'll see that the deleted date is, so we have some in March 11th, we also have one in November, and then at the end of August of 2024, those dates there. So this column is incredibly misleading. It doesn't really capture the deleted date. It is actually capturing the date at which the documents first were absorbed into this review process, not the date that they were even approved for deletion or finally deleted by the system. This is something that many records managers have flagged to SharePoint. Hopefully they change it soon. But this is that really high level. I just need to highlight to everybody that is considering to use Purview or is already using Purview. It's a bit of a gray area in that defensible disposition record. All right, so a brief summary of that architecture. We recommend the use of document sets to bulk apply the metadata to a group of related files, particularly for closed status and date fields. As well, any custom metadata will not be available in Purview disposition exports. You should maintain a copy of the exports permanently, as highlighted in the electronic records standard. The documents in site recycle bins will be available for restoration for roughly 93 days or 3 months afterwards. You should configure the name and descriptors for retention labels strategically to include classification codes, business process names, and relevant regulations like privacy acts. I also have some key takeaways. So from this presentation, I hope that you can have a broader understanding of ways that you can use the federal standard as well as any relevant privacy and information acts to help justify these requirements in discussions with your executive members. As well, remember to apply consistent custom metadata to document libraries based on business process retention and privacy requirements. And if you have any other concerns, please consider connecting with Gravity Union to learn more.